The carriage skidded in the muddy courtyard, and before the horses had fully stilled, the inn door burst open. Rachel Ashford looked up from the dishes she was washing, her hands still submerged in the cold grey water, as she watched the man cross the threshold as if fleeing his own demons. He was not the usual sort of guest at the Rosewood Inn. His clothes, though covered in road dust, revealed the impeccable cut of a London tailor. His dark wool coat bore discreet embroidery that cost more than Rachel would earn in 2 years, serving tankards of ale and changing stained sheets. He carried no luggage, only a small leather satchel clutched to his chest, as if protecting something precious. "I need a room," he said without preamble. His voice carried the refined education of the aristocracy, but also an urgency that made Rachel hastily dry her hands on her apron. "Mr. Hampton is in the stables," she replied, coming around the counter. "But I can. There's no time." He placed gold coins on the scratched wooden counter. Rachel had never seen so much money at once. "The most discreet room you have, and I need no one to know I'm here." His eyes met hers for the first time, and Rachel felt something strange stir in her chest. They were grey eyes like the storm gathering over Kent's slate roofs, but they carried a weight that went beyond physical exhaustion. There was despair there and something more she couldn't name. "The attic room," she heard herself say, taking the key from the last hook. "No one goes up there but me." He nodded once, clutched the satchel more tightly, and followed Rachel up the narrow stairs. She could feel his presence behind her, hear his controlled but heavy breathing. When she opened the door to the small room beneath the sloping roof beams, he entered quickly and went straight to the window, peering through the faded curtains at the courtyard below. "Bring me water to wash my face and something to eat," he requested, without turning around. "And please, if anyone comes asking for me—" "I haven't seen anyone," Rachel finished. She didn't know why she was helping a stranger hide, but something about the man stirred an instinct in her that went beyond reason. He finally turned to face her, and for the first time since entering the inn, his shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. "What's your name?" "Rachel Ashford, sir." "Alexander," he said, and by the way he uttered only his first name, Rachel understood he was omitting something important. "Just Alexander, please." She nodded and went downstairs, her heart beating faster than it should. As she prepared a tray with bread, cheese, and cold meat from the pantry, her mind raced frantically. Who was that man? A criminal? He didn't seem like one. His hands were too refined, his posture too elegant, even in despair. An aristocrat fleeing a duel. Or perhaps, "Rachel!" Mr. Hampton's gruff voice pulled her from her thoughts. The innkeeper entered through the back door, bringing with him the smell of manure and hay. "I saw a carriage in the yard. Do we have a new guest?" "A gentleman requested the attic room," she replied, keeping her eyes down as she had learned to do. "He paid in advance." Hampton grunted, seemingly satisfied. "Let him stay there then, away from the others. I have brewers arriving tonight, and I don't want nobles complaining about noise." Rachel went up the stairs again, balancing the tray. She knocked lightly on the door and waited. When Alexander opened it, she noticed he had removed his coat and cravat. His white linen shirt was open at the collar, revealing tanned skin that suggested he had spent time outdoors, contrary to his urban, aristocratic appearance. "Come in," he said, stepping back to give her space. Rachel placed the tray on the room's sole table, overly aware of his proximity in the cramped space. The low ceiling forced them close, and she could feel the warmth emanating from his body. "Is there anything else you need?" she asked, turning to leave. "Stay." The word came out as a plea, not an order. "Please, it's been so long since I spoke to someone who didn't want something from me." Rachel should have refused. She had work to do, rooms to clean, customers to serve. But something in the man's vulnerability made her hesitate. "Only for a few minutes," she conceded, remaining standing as he sat on the edge of the narrow bed. "Is it always like this here?" Alexander asked, gesturing vaguely towards the window. "Quiet, ordinary, predictable?" "I suppose so," Rachel replied, finding the question strange. "It's not the sort of place that attracts adventures." "Lucky you." He ran his hands through his dark hair, disheveling it. "Have you ever wished you were someone else? To be somewhere else? To live another life?" The question caught her off guard. Rachel thought of all the nights she lay in her small cellar room, listening to the rats scurry in the walls. dreaming of silk dresses and candle-lit balls. She thought of how she saved every shilling she could, imagining a future that always seemed too far away. "Everyone wishes for that sometimes," she admitted, her voice softer. "But wishing doesn't change anything." "No." Alexander looked up at her, and Rachel saw a deep sadness in his eyes. "But sometimes running away does change things. Even if it's just for a few days. What are you running from?" He hesitated, and Rachel almost expected him not to answer. But then he sighed, as if the weight of keeping that secret was too great. "From a scandal, from expectations, from a life I never chose for myself." He gave a humorless laugh. "My father is the Duke of Westmarch. I am Alexander Beaumont. And it's likely in all the London papers by now that I disappeared 3 days before my arranged marriage." Rachel felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She knew that name. Everyone did. The Beaumont family was one of the most powerful in England, their enterprises stretching from coal mines to trading ports. "I was supposed to marry Lady Penelope Ashworth," Alexander continued bitterly. "A perfect alliance between two fortunes. She is beautiful, educated, everything one expects of a duchess. And she doesn't love me either, just as I don't love her." "Then why run now? Why not refuse from the start?" "Because I spent my entire life doing what I was told, being the perfect son, the perfect heir." He stood up, approaching her, until I looked into the future and saw only more decades of the same gilded cage, and I realized that if I didn't run now, I would never have the courage again. Rachel should have been scared, should have called Mr. Hampton, should have done something other than stand there staring into those grey eyes filled with torment. But instead, she found herself asking, "And what will you do now?" "I don't know." Alexander smiled for the first time, and it was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "For the first time in my life, I have no idea what comes next, and it's terrifying and liberating all at once." A shout from downstairs broke the moment. Rachel recognized Mr. Hampton's voice calling for her. "I have to go," she said reluctantly. "Will you come back?" It wasn't a sensible question. He was a runaway duke, she a mere chambermaid. Different worlds, lives that should never intersect. But when Rachel looked at him, she saw only a lost man searching for something real amidst the artifice of his existence. "Tonight," she promised, "when the house is quiet." And as she descended the stairs, Rachel Ashford understood that her life, as predictable and ordinary as she had described it, was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. Night fell over the Rosewood Inn like a thick blanket, bringing with it the murmur of the brewers who occupied the main hall. Rachel moved between the tables with the efficiency born of years of practice, filling tankards and deftly avoiding clumsy hands. But her mind was elsewhere, in the attic where Alexander Beaumont awaited, hidden from the world that sought him. When finally the last customer staggered out the door and Mr. Hampton retired to his quarters, Rachel went upstairs with a covered tray. Her heart beat fast, and she chided herself for her foolishness. He was just a guest, nothing more. The fact that he was a runaway duke should not affect her duties. Alexander opened the door at the first knock, as if he had been waiting. The light of a single candle illuminated the room, casting shadows that made his features even more aristocratic. He had changed his linen shirt for another, equally fine, and his hair was still damp as if he had washed his face in the basin. "I thought you'd given up," he said, stepping back to let her in. "I work late." Rachel placed the tray on the table, noticing he had barely touched the previous meal. "You need to eat. Call me Alexander, please." He sat on the room's sole chair, gesturing for her to take the bed. When Rachel hesitated, he added, "There's no need for formalities between two fugitives." "I'm not a fugitive," she protested, but sat on the edge of the mattress. "No." Alexander tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "I noticed how you watch the road from the kitchen window, how your eyes linger on the dresses of the ladies who occasionally stop here. You may not be running, Rachel Ashford, but you are certainly trapped." The word struck something deep in her chest. Rachel clasped her hands in her lap, sudden vulnerability washing over her. "My mother worked here before me," she heard herself say. "She died when I was 14 of a fever. Mr. Hampton allowed me to stay, taking her place. It was a kindness, I suppose, or convenience. And your father? I never knew him. My mother never spoke of him. Rachel forced a smile. Probably some passing traveller. There are many like that. Alexander remained silent for a moment, and when he spoke his voice held an unexpected softness. I'm sorry. Don't be. Rachel lifted her chin with a dignity that surprised them both. I have a roof over my head and enough food. Many have less. But you deserve more. The simple statement brought a lump to Rachel's throat. No one had ever suggested such a thing. Her life was what it was, and she had learned early not to wish for impossibilities. And you, sir? She asked, changing the subject. What kind of life are you leaving behind? Alexander stood up, moving to the small window. Outside, the moon painted the courtyard silver. A life of endless obligations, dinners where every word is calculated, balls where every dance is a political negotiation. My father began preparing me for the dukedom since I learned to walk. Latin at 5, fencing at 7, economics and land management at 10. That must have been difficult, Rachel offered, hearing the bitterness in his voice. It was suffocating. He turned to face her. I had the best of everything, the best tutors, the best schools. Cambridge, then a year in Paris studying philosophy. But I never had a choice in anything that truly mattered, not even about the woman I would spend the rest of my life with. Rachel stood up, approaching him without thinking. Lady Penelope, you don't love her, but what about her? Will she be suffering your absence? Penelope is probably relieved. Alexander gave a humorless laugh. She has known me since childhood. We were playmates, before our parents decided to turn our friendship into something more convenient. She also has a secret lover, a painter she met in Rome. We spoke about it one night, weeks before the marriage was formally announced. Then, why? Because that's how it works in our world. Marriages are business transactions. Love, if it comes, is a happy coincidence. Otherwise, one maintains appearances and seeks solace elsewhere. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I cannot live like this, Rachel. I cannot wake up every day for the next 50 years knowing I'm just a piece on a chessboard. The passion in his voice awakened something in Rachel. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that gilded cages were still cages. That having everything did not mean having freedom. What will you do when they find you? She asked softly. Because they will look. I know. Alexander turned back to her, and the proximity between them became palpable. Perhaps I only have a few days, perhaps only tonight, but for the first time in my life I am making a decision for myself. The church tower clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the sleeping village. Rachel knew she should go, that staying there alone with him was reckless, but something held her in place, as if her feet had grown roots into the worn floorboards. Tell me about your dreams, Alexander requested, moving to sit again. This time he chose the bed, leaving space beside him. The true ones, not the ones you allow others to see. Rachel hesitated, but eventually sat down too, maintaining a respectable distance. I dream of having a small hat shop. Nothing grand, just a little shop with my own collection. I've been drawing designs for years, kept in a box under my bed. Hats, he smiled, genuinely interested. Where did you learn? On my own, mostly. Watching the ladies who stop here. Studying the fashion engravings I sometimes find discarded. Once I mended a countess's hat, whose plume had come loose. She was so pleased she gave me a gold coin. Rachel smiled at the memory. It was the first time anyone paid for something I created with my own hands. Show me. Now? Why not? Alexander gestured to the door. Go fetch your drawings. I'd like to see what a true artist creates when no one is dictating the rules. Rachel went downstairs silently, her heart pounding. It was madness, all of it. But perhaps madness was exactly what they both needed. In her small cellar room, she retrieved the wooden box from its hiding place and hurried back to the attic. Alexander unfolded each drawing with reverent care, studying the delicate lines and intricate details. Rachel had drawn hats for all seasons, all types of occasions, each one more creative than the last. These are extraordinary, he finally said, looking up at her. Rachel, You have real talent. They're just drawings. No. He shook his head emphatically. They are art. They are vision. They are exactly the kind of originality that is missing from the monotonies of London's drawing rooms. He held up a drawing of a hat adorned with silk flowers. Penelope would adore something like this. In fact, half the ladies I know would pay fortunes for unique creations like these. You're being kind, Rachel murmured, but her cheeks flushed with the compliment. I'm being honest. Alexander carefully returned the drawings. You should be creating these beauties, not cleaning rooms. The world doesn't work that way for people like me. Then perhaps we should change the world. Rachel laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. You sound like a revolutionary. Perhaps that's exactly what I'm becoming. Alexander smiled, and this time the smile reached his eyes, lighting them up. A revolution of two, against a world that insists on telling us who we should be. They talked until the first lights of dawn painted the sky rose and gold. They spoke of dreams and regrets, of the visible and invisible chains that bound them, and at some point, without either of them realizing exactly when, the space between them vanished. Rachel's head rested on Alexander's shoulder, their fingers intertwined without thought. When sleep finally overcame them, it was the sleep of the exhausted and the hopeful, lulled by the impossible fantasy that perhaps, just perhaps, two different worlds could meet, if only for a few stolen days. The morning light streamed into the attic room through the faded curtains, waking Rachel with a sense of disorientation. For a moment, she didn't understand where she was, only registered the unusual warmth around her and the sound of steady breathing that wasn't her own. Then the memory of the previous night returned like a wave, and she opened her eyes to find herself nestled against Alexander's chest, his arm wrapped around her, with a familiarity that should have frightened her, but inexplicably did not. Rachel's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a sudden understanding of the impropriety of the situation. They had done nothing but talk and fall asleep, exhausted by shared confidences. But if anyone found them like this, her reputation would be ruined. She tried to move carefully, but the movement woke Alexander, whose grey eyes opened and immediately met hers. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice hoarse with sleep, and Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized he didn't seem surprised or regretful to find her in his arms. "I need to go," she whispered, but her words lacked conviction. "Mr. Hampton." "Alexander," he corrected gently, making no move to release her. "You promised you'd call me that." "Alexander," Rachel repeated, and the name felt more intimate on her lips than any formal title. "If someone finds out—" "No one will find out." He finally released her, and Rachel felt an unexpected emptiness as the warmth of his body moved away. "But you're right. It would be reckless to cause trouble for you." Rachel quickly stood, smoothing her crumpled dress and trying to fix the hair that had escaped her bun. Her drawings were still scattered across the table, tangible reminders of the emotional intimacy they had shared in the dark hours of the night. She hurried to gather them, folding them with hands that trembled slightly. "Rachel." Alexander's voice stopped her as she reached the door. "What happened tonight? The conversation, not the fact that we fell asleep. It meant something to me. Do you understand?" She turned to face him. Alexander had risen too, and the morning light revealed the sincerity in his expression. Rachel knew she should lie, that she should say it had merely been kindness on his part, nothing more. But looking at the man who had laid bare his soul to her, she couldn't utter falsehoods. "It meant something to me too," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But that doesn't change who we are, Alexander, when your days of flight are over." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Rachel was beginning to recognize. "But perhaps we can have just a few more days, just a little more time in this world where titles and classes don't matter." Rachel wanted to agree, wanted to believe they could exist suspended in that bubble of fantasy. But reality was already knocking at the door, literally and figuratively. She heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, followed by Mr. Hampton's voice calling her name with his usual impatience. "I have to go," she repeated, this time with real urgency. "I'll return when I can with your meal." She hurried down the stairs, her heart racing, finding Mr. Hampton in the corridor with a displeased expression. "Where have you been?" he asked, his small eyes studying her with suspicion. "There's been work waiting since dawn." "Forgive me, sir," Rachel replied, keeping her eyes down. "I wasn't feeling well during the night." He grunted, apparently accepting the excuse. "Is the attic guest still here?" "Yes, sir." He asked not to be disturbed. "As long as he pays, he can stay as long as he likes." Hampton turned to go downstairs, but paused. "Oh, and Rachel, a message arrived earlier. There will be riders passing through the village in the next few days, looking for someone. If you see or hear anything unusual, you are to inform me immediately." Rachel's blood ran cold. "Riders, sir?" "Yes, it seems some nobleman fled on the eve of his wedding. Great scandal. There's a generous reward for anyone who provides information." He went downstairs, leaving Rachel paralyzed in the corridor. The world had caught up with them faster than they expected. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of anxiety. Rachel carried out her tasks with mechanical efficiency, changing sheets, cleaning floors, serving breakfast to the regular guests. But her mind was in the attic, with Alexander, and with what that news meant for them both. When she finally managed to go upstairs again, it was already past noon. She carried a tray with food she had managed to set aside without arousing suspicion. Alexander opened the door before she could knock, pulling her quickly inside. "I know," he said immediately. "I heard the riders arrive an hour ago. They're interrogating all the merchants, checking all the inns." "Then you need to leave." Rachel placed the tray on the table, turning to face him. "Now, before they get here." "Where to?" Alexander walked to the window, peering through a slit in the curtain. "I have no horse. The carriage I hired was returned by the coachman as soon as he dropped me here. If I leave on foot, I'll be even more conspicuous." Rachel bit her lip, her brain working frantically. He was right. A man of his appearance and bearing walking the rural roads of Kent would draw immediate attention. But staying there wasn't an option either, not when Mr. Hampton had been alerted to watch for anything unusual. "There's an old hut in the woods beyond the south pasture," she finally said. "It was a hunter's cabin, but it's been abandoned for years. Few know of its existence. You could hide there until the riders leave." "And how will I get there without being seen?" Rachel thought quickly. "We'll wait until nightfall. There's a back door that leads to the orchard. From there you can reach the woods without passing by the main road." Alexander approached her, taking her hands in his. "Rachel, you don't have to do this. You're risking your position here, perhaps more, if they find out you helped me." "I know." She looked at their intertwined hands, so different in size and texture. His were large and calloused from riding and fencing, but soft from a life without true manual labor. Hers were small and rough from washing dishes and scrubbing floors. "But I can't just hand you over to them, not after." "After what?" he asked softly, bending down so their faces were level. Rachel forced herself to meet his eyes. "After you made me believe there's something more, that perhaps I deserve more than just surviving." Alexander's expression softened, and he raised a hand to touch her face with a gentleness that made Rachel's heart clench. "You deserve the whole world, Rachel Ashford, and if circumstances were different." "But they're not," she interrupted, pulling away before she could do something foolish, like lean into that touch. "And there's no point pretending they are. I need to get back to work. I'll return before nightfall, with clothes that will help you blend in." She left before he could reply, before the expression of desire and frustration on his face could break her resolve. The following hours were the longest of Rachel's life. She watched, her heart racing, as the riders entered the inn, displaying a miniature portrait and asking questions. The portrait showed Alexander in all his aristocratic glory, wearing the fine clothes and imposing bearing of his class. It was difficult to reconcile that image with the disheveled, vulnerable man she had held through the night. Mr. Hampton denied having seen anyone matching the description, and the riders eventually left, but Rachel knew they would return. They would conduct more thorough searches, checking every room, every attic. When darkness finally fell, she went up to the attic for the last time that day, carrying simple clothes that had belonged to a former employee. They weren't perfect, but they would transform Alexander from aristocrat into common laborer. He dressed quickly, and Rachel had to avert her eyes when he changed his shirt, keenly aware of the impropriety, however necessary. When he finished, he looked different, less polished, more common. But his eyes still held that intensity that left her breathless. "Are you ready?" he asked, and Rachel nodded, unable to trust her voice. They descended the back stairs with extreme care, Rachel first, checking each corridor. The inn was relatively quiet, most guests having retired for the night. They reached the back door without incident, and Rachel opened it slowly, mentally thanking herself for having oiled the hinges the week before. The night air was cool and heavy, with the scent of ripe apples from the orchard. A crescent moon provided enough light to see the way, but not so much as to make them easily visible. "This way," Rachel whispered, guiding him through the fruit trees. Her feet knew every stone and root of the path, years of childhood exploration etched into her memory. They reached the edge of the woods in minutes. There, Rachel stopped, turning to Alexander. "Go straight for about 20 minutes. You'll see a huge oak with a bifurcated branch. The hut is just beyond it. There's old firewood if you need a fire, but keep it small. Will you come with me?" The question carried hope and fear in equal measure. Rachel knew she should refuse. She had already risked too much, done more than was sensible. But when she looked at Alexander, she saw not the runaway duke, but the man who had shared his dreams and fears in the dark hours, the man who had made her feel seen for the first time in her life. "Yes," she heard herself say, "but I need to be back before dawn." The gratitude on his face was worth any future consequence. The hut emerged from the darkness like a ghostly apparition, its stone walls covered in ivy and moss, its thatched roof partially collapsed in one corner. Rachel pushed the rotting door, which yielded with a groan of old wood, revealing a surprisingly dry interior, though dusty and filled with cobwebs that shimmered silver in the moonlight. Alexander entered behind her, his presence filling the small space. Rachel could hear him breathe, feel the warmth of his body in the night's chill. His eyes slowly adjusted to the deeper darkness inside, discerning vague shapes of abandoned furniture, a fireplace with blackened bricks, a crude table with a fallen chair beside it. "It's no palace," Rachel murmured, suddenly feeling ashamed by the precariousness of the refuge she had offered to a man accustomed to marble chambers and French furniture. "It's perfect," Alexander replied, and something in his voice made her turn to face him. Even in the dim light she could see the sincerity in his features. "It's real, honest, exactly the opposite of everything I've known." He moved through the hut with childlike curiosity, exploring the forgotten corners. He found the firewood Rachel had mentioned, stacked against a wall, dry enough to use. With surprisingly deft movements for an aristocrat, he began to build a fire in the hearth. "Did you learn that at Cambridge?" Rachel asked, watching him work. "In the Scottish Highlands during a season at an uncle's summer estate." Alexander blew on the nascent embers, coaxing small flames to life. "My father considered it proper that I learn to hunt and survive outdoors, part of a gentleman's education. I never imagined these lessons would be useful in this way." The fire grew gradually, casting golden light that danced on the stone walls and transformed the abandoned hut into something almost cozy. Rachel sat on the packed earth floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and Alexander joined her, maintaining a respectable distance that somehow felt greater than it truly was. "How long do you think you'll have to hide?" she asked, watching the flames lick the dry wood. Alexander remained silent for a long moment, his profile illuminated by the fire revealing the tension in his jaw. "I don't know. My father is persistent when crossed, and this marriage represents an important political alliance. He will mobilize all available resources to find me." "And when they find you?" Rachel turned to face him. "What will happen?" "They'll try to persuade me to return. First with words, then with threats." He ran his fingers through his hair, disheveling it further. "My father will say I'm shaming the family, that my obligations outweigh my personal desires. My mother will cry, she'll appeal to my sense of duty, and perhaps eventually I will give in, because that's what I've always done." The defeat in his voice broke something inside Rachel. She found herself reaching out, her fingers meeting his in the space between them. "Or perhaps it won't yield. Perhaps this is the time you finally choose your own life." Alexander looked at their intertwined hands, his fingers clasping hers with a force that bordered on desperation. "And what life would that be? I am the heir to a dukedom, Rachel. I cannot simply disappear and become a common man. There are responsibilities, lands, hundreds of people who depend on the proper management of the Beaumont estates. So you'll go back?" It wasn't a question, but an observation, and Rachel felt her heart sink even as she uttered the words. "I don't know." He turned completely towards her, his grey eyes reflecting the flames. 2 days ago, I would have said with certainty that I would, that this was just a temporary escape, a moment of rebellion before accepting my fate. But now? Now what? Now I've met you. The words emerged softly, yet laden with meaning. And for the first time in my life, I've glimpsed something I truly want, not something I've been told to want. Rachel's heart quickened dangerously. "Alexander, you don't know me. We've only spent 2 days together, and in these 2 days you've shown me more honesty and courage than I've found in years, navigating ballrooms and diplomatic dinners." He raised their intertwined hand, pressing it against his chest, where Rachel could feel the accelerated beat of his heart. "You risk your position, perhaps your safety, to help a stranger. You share your dreams without fear of judgment. You look at me and see only a man, not a title or an estate." "Because that's what you are," Rachel whispered. "Just a man, a good, lost man, trying to find his place in the world." The distance between them evaporated without either of them quite realizing when or how. Alexander leaned in, his forehead touching hers, their breaths mingling in the narrow space. Rachel should have pulled away, should have remembered the impossibilities that separated them, but her body refused to obey reason. "Rachel," he murmured, her name a prayer and a question simultaneously. She responded by leaning forward, closing the last vestige of distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if both feared the moment might dissolve like mist in the sun. But then something broke, an invisible barrier crumbling, and the kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more necessary. Alexander's hands moved to her face, cradling it with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity of his lips. Rachel felt herself melt, years of loneliness and unacknowledged yearning surfacing. No one had ever touched her like this, as if she were precious, as if she mattered. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Rachel saw her own astonishment reflected in Alexander's eyes, the shared understanding that they had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. "I can promise you nothing," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I don't know what the future holds, nor even what will happen tomorrow." "I know." Rachel touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with trembling fingers. "But tonight is ours. Just tonight, we can pretend the world outside doesn't exist." Alexander captured her hand, kissing her palm with a reverence that brought tears to Rachel's eyes. "You deserve more than empty promises and uncertain futures. You deserve a man who can offer you the world." "I don't want the world." Rachel forced herself to meet his eyes, letting him see the raw truth in her soul. "I just want this moment, this honesty, something real amidst all the lies and pretenses." They sat together as the fire slowly died, their bodies intertwined, sharing warmth and comfortable silences. Rachel memorized every detail. The scent of wood smoke mingled with his musky aroma, the comforting weight of his arm around her shoulders, the feeling of his heart beating against her back. "Tell me more about your dream," Alexander requested, his voice a murmur against her hair. "The hat shop, what would it be like?" Rachel let herself sink into the fantasy, painting verbal images of a small boutique with glass windows, mannequins displaying her creations, elegant ladies coming in to commission exclusive pieces. Alexander listened attentively, asking questions, offering suggestions that revealed a sharp business mind behind the aristocratic facade. "It could work," he said eventually. "With initial capital and proper connections, you could establish yourself in London. The ladies of society are always seeking originality, something to distinguish them at social events." "It's just a dream," Rachel protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "The best ventures begin as dreams." Alexander tightened his embrace, and you have the talent required to turn it into reality. Talent without resources remains just talent. Rachel felt the familiarity of resignation returning. It would take years saving every shilling to gather enough capital, and even then, who would take me seriously? A chambermaid with no connections, no formal education. I would take you seriously. The declaration was firm without hesitation, and I know others who would too if they had the opportunity to see your work. Rachel turned in his arms, studying his face in the flickering light of the embers. You're talking about a world that doesn't belong to me, Alexander. A world that would never accept me as an equal. Then perhaps it's time to challenge those artificial boundaries. He touched her face again, and Rachel leaned into the touch like a flower, turning towards the sun. Changes are happening. Rachel, the old order is being questioned. Why should talent and ambition be a privilege of birth? Because that's how the world has worked for centuries, and perhaps it's time for it to start working differently. They discussed impossible possibilities until the embers dwindled to warm ash and the pre-dawn darkness enveloped the hut. Rachel knew she had to leave, that every additional minute increased the risk of her absence being noticed, but the thought of leaving that safe refuge, of returning to the reality that awaited them, was almost unbearable. I need to go back, she finally said, forcing herself to pull away from the warmth of his embrace. The cold dawn air bit at her skin immediately. Alexander rose with her, reluctance evident in every movement. When can you return? Tonight, perhaps, or tomorrow. It depends on the nights, if they're still searching the area. Rachel smoothed her dress, trying to remove visible evidence of hours spent on the dirt floor. Rachel. He took her hand, pulling her back for one last kiss, this one laden with desperation and unspoken promises. Be careful. If there's any danger, any suspicion, don't come back. Your safety is more important than my comfort. I'll come back, she promised, knowing even as she uttered the words that it was a promise she might not be able to keep. Just stay hidden and keep the fire low. The walk back through the woods was solitary and cold, each step taking her further from that impossible interlude and returning her to the reality of her existence. When the inn came into view, its windows still dark except for a faint light in the kitchen, Rachel forced herself to reassume the role of an obedient chambermaid, tucking the last vestiges of Rachel with Alexander somewhere deep in her heart. She didn't notice the figure watching from the stable's shadows, narrow eyes following her stealthy return through the orchard. Dawn arrived with a thick fog that enveloped the Rosewood Inn like a grey shroud, transforming the familiar into something menacing. Rachel moved through the kitchen with mechanical movements, her hands performing tasks she knew so well they required no conscious thought. But her mind was in the woods, in the abandoned hut, with Alexander alone and vulnerable. She didn't notice Mr. Hampton observing her with narrowed eyes until he spoke, making her jump and drop the spoon she held. You look exhausted, Rachel. His voice carried something she couldn't identify, a note of suspicion that made her straighten up defensively. Another difficult night? Yes, sir. The insomnia troubles me occasionally. She bent to pick up the spoon, avoiding his gaze. Curious. Hampton approached, his heavy steps echoing on the stone floor. The guest in the attic also seems to have disappeared during the night. I went up to check if he needed anything and found the room empty. Rachel's heart pounded, but years of concealing emotions served her well. She turned to face him with a carefully constructed expression of innocence. Perhaps he left early, sir. Some travelers prefer the road before dawn. Leaving his things behind? Hampton gestured vaguely towards the stairs. His fine clothes are still in the room. What gentleman would depart without his luggage? Rachel forced a shrug. I can't explain the eccentricities of guests, sir. I merely serve them. Hampton's eyes remained on her for another moment, calculating, measuring. Then he turned away, but his next words chilled her. The knights will return today. They want to inspect every room personally. They say the fugitive might be disguised, hiding in plain sight. After he left, Rachel leaned against the counter, her legs suddenly weak. She needed to warn Alexander. But how? She couldn't disappear again without arousing more suspicion, and if Hampton really had seen her returning from the orchard, if he suspected. The morning dragged on with torturous slowness. Rachel performed her tasks under Hampton's watchful eye, acutely aware of every movement, every word. When the knights finally arrived, 3 men in impeccable uniforms and stern expressions, her heart sank even further. The leader, a middle-aged man with a grey moustache and military bearing, introduced himself as Captain Hartley. His eyes swept the inn's main hall with professional efficiency, missing no detail. "We need to inspect all the rooms," he announced, his voice carrying unwavering authority. "The Duke of Westmarch is offering a substantial reward for information regarding his son. £500 for anyone who leads us to Alexander Beaumont's whereabouts." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. £500. It was a fortune, enough to buy the inn itself 3 times over. She saw greed gleam in Hampton's eyes, the way he squared his shoulders. "Certainly, Captain. We have few guests at the moment, and only one arrived in the last few days. But he disappeared during the night, leaving his clothes." Hampton cast a significant glance at Rachel. "My employee was the last to see him." All eyes turned to her. Rachel forced herself to remain calm, not to reveal the terror that threatened to suffocate her. "I took him food last night, sir," she said, keeping her voice steady. "He was there then. I don't know when he left." "Describe him." Captain Hartley's command cut through the air like a blade. Rachel chose her words carefully, offering a description generic enough to apply to many men, yet specific enough to seem honest. Tall, dark hair, polite manners. He wore quality clothes, but was covered in road dust when he arrived. Hartley removed the miniature portrait from his pocket, extending it to her. "This man?" Rachel looked at the image, her heart painfully squeezing. It was Alexander, painted in all his aristocratic glory, wearing silks and velvets, a solemn and distant expression on his face. But it wasn't the Alexander she knew. The man in the painting would never laugh at her hat designs or sleep on the floor of an abandoned hut. "Perhaps," she finally replied. "It's difficult to say for sure. The gentleman I hosted was quite disheveled from his journey." Her hesitation was enough. Hartley exchanged glances with his men, and Rachel knew they had decided she knew more than she admitted. "Where is he now?" The question came softly, but laden with implicit threat. "I don't know, sir. As I said, he disappeared during the night." "Interesting." Hartley approached her, his considerable height making him intimidating. "Because one of my men spoke with the village blacksmith this morning. He mentioned seeing a young woman crossing the fields towards the woods last night, well after dark." "A young woman who perfectly fits your description." The silence that followed was absolute. Rachel could hear her own heart pounding, feel the weight of the gazes fixed upon her. She needed to think, needed to find a plausible excuse, but her mind was blank. She began, but Hampton interrupted her. "You went to the woods?" His voice carried fury and something more, a sense of betrayal. "After everything I've done for you, sheltering you, giving you work, you deceive me like this." "It wasn't what it seemed," Rachel tried, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "Show us where he is." Hartley didn't raise his voice, but there was steel in it. "Cooperate, and perhaps the Duke will be merciful. Resist, and you will be accused of aiding a fugitive from justice. That means imprisonment, possibly for years." Rachel closed her eyes, her world crumbling around her. She thought of Alexander, hidden in the hut, trusting her. She thought of the shared conversations, the admitted dreams, the kiss that still burned in her memory. She thought of how he had made her feel seen, valued, as if her life could mean something beyond mere survival. "No," she heard herself say, and the word emerged firm, clear, charged with a determination that surprised even herself. "I will not betray him." Hampton's slap caught her off guard, throwing her against the counter. Pain exploded across her face, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. But before he could raise his hand again, Hartley restrained him. "Control yourself," the captain ordered. Then he turned to Rachel, and there was something akin to respect in his eyes. "You are foolish, girl, brave but foolish. You are throwing away your life for a man who can never return your feelings. He is nobility. You are... well, you know what you are." "I know exactly what I am," Rachel replied, lifting her chin defiantly, even as her face throbbed with pain. "And I know I'd rather be honest and poor than rich through betrayal." "Admirable sentiments, but impractical." Hartley sighed, as if genuinely regretting what he had to do. "Gentlemen, search the woods. Look for any structure that could serve as shelter. And you," he turned to Hampton. "Keep her locked up until we return. She can't warn him if she's confined." Rough hands grabbed Rachel, dragging her towards the cellar where her small room was. She didn't resist, knowing it would be futile. But her brain worked frantically, calculating how long it would take the knights to find the hut, if Alexander would have any warning before they arrived. The cellar was dark and damp, smelling of mold and earth. They threw her inside unceremoniously, and the door slammed shut behind her, followed by the sound of a lock being turned. Rachel remained on the floor for a moment, letting the tears finally fall. Not for herself, but for Alexander, for all they could have had if the world were different. But then, through the small ground-level window, she saw a familiar figure. The young stable boy, a lad of perhaps 12 who had always been kind to her, was peering in from outside. When their eyes met, he gestured urgently. Rachel moved to the window, pressing her face against the iron bars. "Timothy, I heard what they did, Miss Rachel," he whispered, his eyes wide with youthful admiration. "I know the woods better than any city knight. I can reach the old hunter's hut before they follow the long trail." Hope ignited in Rachel's chest. "You would do that. There's danger. You were always kind to me, miss. When the other boys made fun of my stutter, you stood up for me." Timothy straightened, trying to appear braver than he probably felt. "Should I just tell the gentleman to run?" "Yes, and tell him?" Rachel hesitated, so many unspoken words pressing against her throat. "Tell him I regret nothing." The boy nodded and disappeared, his bare feet silent on the damp grass. Rachel remained at the window, watching the fog begin to dissipate under the rising sun. She didn't know if Timothy would succeed, if he would arrive in time, if Alexander would escape. But she had done everything she could. The hours dragged on with slow agony. Rachel heard movements above, distant voices, the sound of horses departing. Then, silence. A silence so profound it seemed to press against her ears. When the door finally opened, it was almost evening. Hampton descended the stairs heavily, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "They found him," he said, and Rachel felt her world shatter. "But the place was empty. It seems your gentleman received warning and escaped." Relief so intense it bordered on pain flooded Rachel. Alexander was safe, at least for now. "You've lost your position here," Hampton continued, his voice harsh. "I want you gone by morning, and you can thank me that I'm not turning you over to the authorities for complicity." Rachel nodded, too exhausted to feel anything but distant gratitude for that small mercy. When Hampton left, she curled up on her narrow cot, pulling the thin blanket around her shoulders. She was ruined, without position, without references, without prospects. But Alexander was free, and in that moment, it seemed a fair price to pay. The carriage stopped before the Rosewood Inn 3 days after Rachel's forced departure, its wheels carving deep ruts in the muddy courtyard. Hampton emerged from the inn, wiping his hands on his greasy apron, his expression shifting from curiosity to apprehension as he recognized the golden crest on the carriage door. The Beaumont symbol was unmistakable, engraved in gold against polished mahogany. A footman descended first, impeccable in his navy blue livery with silver embroidery, and opened the door. Alexander Beaumont stepped out of the carriage with the natural grace of aristocracy, but there was something different about him. His clothes were impeccable again, the fine wool coat tailored to perfection, but his eyes carried a determination that wasn't present when he had first arrived, fleeing like a criminal. "Mr. Hampton," Alexander's voice cut through the air with authority. "I need to speak with Miss Rachel Ashford immediately." Hampton hesitated, his small eyes darting nervously between Alexander and the carriage's second occupant, a young woman of aristocratic beauty who descended with the footman's help. She wore a travel dress in shades of emerald green, her blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls beneath a feathered hat. "Miss Ashford is no longer employed here, your lordship." Hampton bowed subserviently, but there was resentment in his voice. "She was dismissed 3 days ago for indiscretions." "Where is she now?" The question emerged sharply, leaving no room for evasions. "I don't know, sir. She left without stating her destination." Hampton wrung his hands, his posture uncomfortable. "Had I known she was important to your lordship, I never would have. She is here." The blonde woman spoke for the first time, her clear voice carrying refined education and something more, a genuine kindness. "She wouldn't have gone far without resources or references. She's likely in the village trying to find work." Alexander turned to her, gratitude evident on his face. "Thank you, Penelope." Lady Penelope Ashworth, for it was she, offered him a small but warm smile. "Go find her. I will wait here and try to persuade Mr. Hampton to be more forthcoming about recent events." As Alexander walked towards the village, his boots sinking slightly into the muddy road, his mind reconstructed the 3 days since Timothy had alerted him in the hut. The boy had arrived breathless, speaking disjointedly about nights and imprisonment, and Alexander immediately understood what Rachel had risked for him. He had fled through the woods, using hunting trails he knew from his seasons in the Highlands, eventually reaching a smaller estate belonging to a distant cousin. There he had faced the most difficult decision of his life. He could continue fleeing, perhaps disappearing onto the continent, living anonymously but free, or he could return, face his father, and fight for the right to choose his own destiny. The second option was terrifying, promising painful confrontations and possible family rupture. But whenever he considered simply disappearing, he saw Rachel's face, heard her words about deserving more than merely surviving. The confrontation with his father had been as brutal as he expected. The Duke of Westmarch had roared, threatened to disinherit him, invoked family honor and responsibility to generations of Beaumonts. But then Alexander had done something he had never done before. He stood firm. He refused to bend, to accept the path laid out for him. "I will marry when I find someone I can truly love and respect," he had declared, his voice not wavering even in the face of ducal fury. "I will not turn my life into a business transaction." It was Penelope who eventually brokered peace. She herself had requested an audience with the Duke, confessing her love for the Roman painter, explaining that both she and Alexander deserved the chance at genuine happiness. Her honesty, combined with Alexander's inflexible refusal to yield, had finally broken the Duke's resistance, not with grace, but with reluctant acceptance. "You have 6 months," his father had finally conceded. 6 months to prove you can manage the Beaumont estates, according to your own principles. If you fail, you will return to the path I have set. If you succeed—" The Duke did not finish the sentence, but the concession was implied. Now, Alexander walked through the village with determined purpose, searching for brown hair and eyes that held both dreams and resignation. He asked merchants, laborers, anyone who might have seen a young woman alone looking for work. It was the vicar's wife who finally directed him to the church. "There's a young woman cleaning the belfry," she said, curiosity evident in her gaze as she assessed Alexander's fine clothes. "She arrived 2 days ago, offering to work for food and shelter in the church barn." Alexander found her where the vicar's wife indicated, high up in the narrow belfry, scrubbing windows with a vigor that spoke of desperation to keep busy. She didn't hear him ascend, lost in thought, and he had a moment to simply observe her. Her hair was loose, falling down her back in untidy waves, her simple dress stained with dust and effort. But there was dignity in her posture, a refusal to be broken by circumstances. "Rachel," she turned so quickly she almost knocked over the bucket of water. Her eyes widened, shock and confusion battling on her face. "Alexander," her voice emerged as an incredulous whisper. "What are you doing here? If the knights find out—" "It doesn't matter anymore." He moved through the cramped space, closing the distance between them. "I've returned. I faced my father. The arranged marriage has been dissolved." Rachel shook her head as if she couldn't process his words. "I don't understand. You fled. You were hiding. Until a very brave young woman reminded me that running away solves nothing, that sometimes we have to stay and fight for what we want." Alexander took her hands, now rough from hard work, and pressed them against his chest. "Rachel, you sacrificed everything for me, your position, your safety, your future. You allowed me time to think, to understand that I could choose differently." Tears began to slide down Rachel's face. "You owe me nothing. I did what I did because it was right. not expecting reward. I know. Alexander released one of her hands to touch her face, wiping away the tears with his thumb. And that is exactly why I am here, because you expected nothing but you deserve everything. Alexander, we are from different worlds, she began, but he silenced her with a soft, gentle kiss, laden with promise. Then we will build a new world, he said when they separated. One where talent and character matter more than titles. One where a brilliant milliner can establish her own boutique in London, with capital and connections provided by someone who believes in her talent. Rachel stared at him, barely daring to believe. Are you talking about business? I'm talking about partnership. Alexander smiled, that smile that transformed his entire face. My father has agreed to give me 6 months to prove I can manage the Beaumont interests differently. I intend to start by investing in ventures that promote genuine talent, regardless of social origin. Your hat shop would be the first project. You can't do that. Rachel's voice trembled. People will talk, your reputation, let them talk. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her. I've spent my entire life worrying about what others think, and it almost trapped me in an empty existence. You showed me there's more, Rachel. That courage isn't in accepting what we're given, but in reaching for what we desire. And what do you desire? She asked, her voice small but hopeful. You. The answer came without hesitation. Not now. Not forced by convention or expectation, but eventually when we have built something together, when you no longer need to wonder if you are with me out of dependence or choice. I want you to have your own boutique, your own success, your own identity. And then, if you still want me, I will ask for your hand properly. Rachel pressed her face against his chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. This sounds like a dream, an impossible dream. The best dreams always seem impossible until we make them real. Alexander kissed her hair, his arms tightening around her protectively. And you won't be alone on this journey. Penelope will come with us to London, at least initially. She wants to introduce you to the ladies of society, help establish your reputation as a milliner. Lady Penelope knows about me. Rachel looked up, alarm on her face. I told her everything. Alexander smiled at the memory. And do you know what she said? That it was time someone challenged the absurd conventions that trap us. That if I had found someone who truly saw me, I would be a fool to let her slip away because of antiquated prejudices. They remained embraced in the silent belfry, the setting sun painting the sky through the newly cleaned windows. Below them, the village continued its tranquil existence, unaware of the quiet revolution happening in that narrow space. I'm afraid, Rachel confessed eventually, afraid of failing, of not being good enough, of embarrassing you. Impossible. Alexander pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Because you are already braver, more honest and more talented than half the people I know. All you need is opportunity, and we will provide that. A tap on the stairs announced Penelope's arrival, who ascended gracefully despite the cramped space. She studied Rachel with intelligent eyes, and something in her assessment seemed to satisfy her. So this is the young woman who captured the heart of the most stubborn man I know, she said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. Miss Ashford, I am delighted to finally meet you. Rachel made an awkward curtsy, acutely aware of her stained dress and disheveled hair compared to Penelope's impeccable elegance. Lady Ashworth, just Penelope, please. She extended her hands, taking Rachel's with surprising gentleness. Anyone brave enough to defy conventions the way you have is someone I wish to know better. And Alexander is right about your talent. I've seen your designs. They are extraordinary. Tears threatened to return to Rachel's eyes. You are very kind. We are not kind, Penelope corrected firmly. We are practical. The world is changing, Miss Ashford. The old rules are being questioned, and those of us with resources have a responsibility to use our privileges to help shape a better future. Alexander watched the two women converse, his heart filling with something he hadn't experienced before. It wasn't merely love, though he certainly felt that for Rachel. It was hope. Hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could create something meaningful with his life, that his title and resources could serve purposes beyond perpetuating empty traditions. So, he said, when there was a lull in the conversation. "Are we all in agreement? Rachel will come with us to London. We'll establish the boutique and we'll prove that talent transcends social class." Penelope nodded immediately. Rachel hesitated only a moment before agreeing too, her face transforming with a smile that lit up the entire bell tower. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and clear. "Yes, we will try." And as the three descended the bell tower together, towards the waiting carriage and the uncertain but promising future that awaited in London, Rachel understood that her life had irrevocably changed. No longer would it be defined merely by survival, but by possibility. And though fear remained, it was overcome by something stronger, a determination to prove that her worth was not determined by the accident of birth, but by the content of her character and the strength of her dreams. London spring had arrived with its customary gentleness, painting the royal parks vibrant green and filling the air with the fragrances of newly bloomed flowers. 6 months had passed since Rachel Ashford arrived in the capital in a carriage bearing a ducal crest, her heart oscillating between terrifying hope and paralyzing fear. 6 months that transformed her existence in ways she had never dared to imagine during those lonely nights in the cellar of the Rosewood Inn. The boutique occupied a respectable address in Mayfair, its facade modest yet elegant, with display windows showcasing creations that quickly became objects of fascination among ladies of high society. Ashford Millinery was engraved in gold letters above the glass-paned door, a name that now carried weight in circles where birth and lineage traditionally determined access and acceptance. Rachel carefully positioned a new hat in the display window, her hands moving with a confidence born of months of constant practice. The creation was one of her favorites, a confection of midnight blue velvet adorned with peacock feathers and tiny pearls that caught the light in a way that seemed almost magical. Every stitch had been sewn by her own hands, every detail considered and reconsidered until perfection was achieved. Extraordinary as always, Penelope's voice from behind her made her smile. The friendship between them had blossomed in an unexpected but genuine way, built on mutual respect and a shared admiration for courage in defying conventions. "You're biased," Rachel replied, turning to find Penelope examining the order books on the polished mahogany counter. "I'm honest." Penelope looked up, her own adorned with one of the first hats Rachel had created, a delicate design in shades of pink that perfectly complemented her fair complexion. "And these numbers confirm my honesty. 3 duchesses, 7 countesses, and more titled ladies than I can count await your creations. You've become the most sought-after milliner in London in less than half a year." Rachel allowed herself a moment of pride before the familiar insecurity returned, only because you and Alexander opened doors that would otherwise have remained closed. "We opened doors," Penelope agreed, moving to sit in one of the elegant chairs arranged for clients. "But you walked through them with talent that speaks for itself. Half of those ladies initially came out of curiosity or loyalty to Alexander. They returned because your creations are incomparable." Before Rachel could reply, the doorbell chimed softly, announcing a visitor. Both turned to find a middle-aged woman dressed with sober elegance, her bearing carrying the unmistakable authority of high nobility. Rachel recognized her immediately from the portrait circulating in newspapers and engravings, the Duchess of Westmarch, Alexander's mother. Rachel's heart pounded. She had carefully avoided any encounter with Alexander's parents over the past months, aware that her presence represented everything the Duke and Duchess initially repudiated. But now there was no escape, nowhere to hide, as those penetrating eyes assessed her with uncomfortable intensity. "Your Grace?" Penelope rose immediately, curtsying appropriately. Rachel followed suit, her knees trembling slightly. The Duchess approached with measured steps, her gaze never leaving Rachel's face. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the refined breeding of the aristocracy, but also an unexpected softness. "So you are Miss Ashford?" It wasn't a question. "The young woman who has caused such a transformation in my son." Rachel forced herself to meet her gaze. "Your Grace, I never intended to." "Cause trouble?" The Duchess raised an elegant hand, silencing her. "No, I suppose not. But you have, inevitably. My husband still refuses to utter your name. Society murmurs endlessly about Alexander's new protégé. And yet..." She paused, moving slowly through the boutique, examining the displayed hats with knowing eyes. She picked up the midnight blue velvet one that Rachel had just positioned, turning it over in her hands with evident appreciation. "And yet," she continued, "I have not seen my son so alive, so determined, since he was a child before the obligations of the dukedom began to suffocate him. He returns from his visits here with a light in his eyes, speaking of investments and opportunities, of necessary changes to the antiquated structures that govern our world." The Duchess turned, still holding the hat. "May I try it on?" Surprise shot through Rachel like an electric current. "Certainly, Your Grace." With hands that no longer trembled, Rachel helped the Duchess position the hat, adjusting the angle until it perfectly complemented her aristocratic features. When she finished, she guided her to the large mirror that occupied an entire wall of the boutique. The Duchess studied her reflection in prolonged silence. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "My husband will say I am encouraging scandalous behavior by patronizing your establishment. And perhaps he will be right, but he will also be wrong." She turned to face Rachel directly. "I have known Alexander since the moment he first drew breath. I watched him grow under the weight of expectations that would have broken lesser men. He always did everything we asked, always fulfilled his obligations without complaint. And I watched the light gradually disappear from his eyes year after year, until he seemed merely a shadow of the boy who once chased butterflies in summer gardens." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as she heard the maternal pain in the Duchess's voice. "Then he ran away," the older woman continued, "and returned transformed. Still my son, still responsible and honorable, but now with a purpose that goes beyond merely fulfilling obligations. And that, Miss Ashford, is your gift to him, to our family." "I did nothing but be honest," Rachel murmured. "Exactly." The Duchess touched her face with surprising gentleness. "In a world of artifice and calculation, you offered honesty, and that honesty awakened him to possibilities he had never considered." She carefully removed the hat, returning it to Rachel. "I will take this one, and I shall order 3 others for the summer season, but I came here for another purpose beyond acquisitions." From the delicate reticule she carried, the Duchess removed an envelope sealed with ducal wax. She held it out to Rachel, watching as she opened it with trembling fingers. "It is an invitation," the Duchess explained as Rachel read the contents with growing incredulity. "For the summer ball we will host at our London residence in 2 weeks' time. Alexander insisted you be included among the official guests, not merely tolerated as a tradeswoman providing services." Rachel looked up, unable to fully process the meaning. "But, Your Grace, my presence would cause scandal." "Without a doubt." The Duchess smiled again, this time with something akin to mischief. "And perhaps it is precisely the kind of scandal London society needs. My son is determined to prove that merit outweighs birth, that talent and character should define social worth, not accidents of lineage. It is a battle that will take years, decades perhaps, but every journey begins with a single step." She moved towards the door, then paused, turning one last time. "He loves you, you know. Perhaps he has not yet uttered the words. My son inherited his father's emotional reticence, but I see it in his eyes when he speaks of you, and a mother recognizes love in her son." After the Duchess left, Rachel remained motionless, holding the invitation as if it might disappear at any moment. Penelope approached, reading over her shoulder. "She's right," Penelope said softly. "About Alexander loving you. Everyone can see it except apparently the 2 of you. It's too soon," Rachel protested weakly. "Too complicated." "Love is rarely convenient or simple." Penelope took her hands. "But it is real, and after all you both have sacrificed and risked, do you not at least deserve to explore that possibility?" The doorbell chimed again, and this time it was Alexander who entered, bringing with him the energy that always seemed to fill any space he occupied. His eyes met Rachel's immediately, and something in that gaze made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. "I saw my mother's carriage departing," he said, approaching. "I hope she wasn't too intimidating." "She was extraordinarily kind." Rachel still held the invitation, and Alexander noticed his face lighting up. So she delivered it personally. Excellent. He took Rachel's hands, unaware or indifferent to Penelope's presence. Rachel, I know being at that ball will be difficult. There will be stares, murmurs, judgments, but I would immensely like you to come as my guest, not as a purveyor of hats. Why? The question emerged as a whisper. Why risk more scandal, more disapproval? Because it's time. Alexander pulled her closer, his grey eyes holding hers with an intensity that left her breathless. Time to stop hiding what I feel, to pretend this is merely a business partnership or a convenient arrangement. 6 months ago I asked you to wait, to build something of your own before we considered any future together. And you have done that, Rachel. You've created a successful business, established yourself independently, proved to everyone that your worth does not depend on my influence. Tears began to slip down Rachel's face. Alexander, I am not asking for your hand now, he continued quickly. Not here, not like this. But I am asking for your permission to court you properly, so that the world may know my intentions are honorable and serious, that I intend, should you eventually accept me, to make you my wife. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity, though it was only seconds. Rachel looked at the man who had transformed her life, who had believed in her when no one else did, who had risked social disapproval and familial rupture to champion her right to opportunity. Yes, she heard herself say, her voice firm and clear. Yes, I will come to the ball, and yes, you may court me properly. The smile that lit up Alexander's face was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. He pulled her into an embrace that was probably excessively familiar for a commercial establishment, but neither seemed to care. Behind them, Penelope clapped softly, her own face moist with happy tears. When they finally parted, Alexander held Rachel's face between his hands, touching his forehead to hers. You are the bravest person I know, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that courage. You already are, she replied, touching his face with fingers that finally didn't tremble. You always were. Outside the boutique, London continued its frenetic existence, unaware of the silent promise exchanged in that small but significant space. But within those walls, 3 people who dared to defy conventions quietly celebrated a victory that went beyond personal romance. It was a victory of principle over prejudice, of merit over birth, of courage over conformity. And when Rachel finally closed the boutique that night, carefully placing the ducal invitation in her reticule, she did so with a heart lighter than she had carried in her entire life. The future remained uncertain, full of challenges and battles yet to be fought. But now, for the first time, that future shone with limitless possibility. The girl who had once cleaned rooms in a modest Kent inn had learned that dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed, could be achieved with courage, determination, and the support of equally brave souls. And that lesson, more valuable than any fortune or title, was something she would carry with her for all the days to come.